So whatever, I'm not horribly worried about it. What I am horribly worried about is that when I stand up here all day and lecture at you, you're not learning. And that was indicative of how I ran the review last time and then how we wound up on last exam. So this time, we're gonna start today with your lab activity. And I'm going to just show you how we classify joints, and then each table you're gonna work together and you're gonna learn your joints. I'll show you, there are really only 6 joints that you have to worry about. And then I'm gonna randomly give you a joint that you're gonna teach the class about, your table. So there's going to be a lot of verbal instruction today for your lab activity, which means you need to be listening to me. I'm not going to write things down right now because you're going to teach each other joints. And it's going to go quick, and then after we look at our 6 joint types, we'll talk about specifics of your knee joint, and we'll go through movements and things so that we can get through chapter 8 quickly. So, everything in the body for anatomy and physiology gets classified based on anatomy, or the structure, or physiology, the function. So if we look at that, then we can classify our joints based on their anatomy or the structure, and we can classify them based on function. So, structural classification. We have 3 types of joints based on the movement they allow, and then we've got 3 types of joints based on what we find between them. So if we look at structural, we've got fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints. Synovial joints is not going to be one of the ones that I'm going to have you teach each other about. But based on structure, we've got fibrous joints and cartilaginous joints. And then we've got, based on function, 3 different classes by how much movement they allow. We have synarthroses, which allow no movement. We have amphiarthroses, which allow some movement. We have diarthroses, which allow full movement, and they are, all of our synovial joints are diarthroses. And this is a weird thing for people to wrap their head around, because like your SI joint between your sacrum and your ilium is a synovial joint. It's freely movable, but that's not a very movable joint. So synovial ones are kind of weird, and we're going to talk about that. So what I want you to do now is go through and figure out, okay, then we have fibrous joints and cartilaginous joints. There are 3 types of fibrous joints. There are 2 types of cartilaginous joints. They're going to fit into this functional classification somehow, so figure it out. And then I'm going to come to you and I'm going to hand your table a syndesmosis. And you're going to have to teach a class what a syndesmosis is by structure and function. Okay? So write it down, do whatever you got to do, but we're teaching each other joints. Go! Everybody got your joint? You're ready to teach the class? If you want, you can go grab it. So, okay. So, fibrous joints. What are our 3 types of fibrous joints? Suture, syndesmosis, and agomphosis. Okay. What are our 2 types of cartilaginous joints? Synchondroses. Synchondrosis and symphysis. Okay, so let's talk about each of these then. The functional classifications. Synarthroses allow no movement. Amphiarthroses allow some movement. Diarthroses are freely movable. So, okay, suture. Who had suture? All right, what's a suture?
It's only found in the skull. It holds, it's short interconnecting fibers and found only in the skull, but it holds basically the skull together.
Yeah, so it's little tiny bands of fibrous connective tissue, so that's what makes it a fibrous joint. And what is it by functional class?
So it's
It's a
synarthrosis.
synarthrosis. So sutures are synarthroses. They should allow no movement. It's tiny little fibers. In a small, like developing skull, you would still see fibrous connective tissue, but as you age, it becomes ossified. So the older you get, then it gets replaced by bone. Okay, who had syndesmosis? Okay, what's the syndesmosis?
It's a long collagen fibers.
So here we've got collagen fibers are holding our bones together. And what did we learn about their movement?
They're mobile, slightly mobile.
So they are amphiarthritic. So everybody's supposed to be learning all the joints now, whether it was your joint or not. So you should be taking notes. So syndesmoses are kind of these weird joints. They're also fibrous because what we have between our bones are collagen fibers. This is a weird example of one, but it is an example nonetheless. This little tiny ligament that you find between the distal tibia and fibula. Also between these bones and between your radius and ulna, we find another kind of syndesmosis. And that's what most books use as the example. And they're called interosseous membranes. And what you find is that we'll have one band go with all of the collagen fibers kind of going this way, and then behind it, one going this way. So it's like these two layers of fibrous tissue that you find between your radius and ulna and between your tibia and fibula. I like that example better of a syndesmosis. But so in our syndesmoses, we just have these bands of collagen fibers of varying lengths. And they allow varying, well, they're not freely movable, they allow some movement, so they're amphiarthroses by functional classification. Okay? Who had a gomphosis? Yeah.
They are the only example of a pagan socket, and we've got the only example in the body is the teeth fitting into the nasal alveoli, which you can see the zinc teeth in here, so they go into the socket here, where the root of the tooth is, and then maxilla or mandible.
Say that again. So where are the only bones that we find in gomphoses?
The teeth, or
Well, what bones? The teeth are like modified. Your maxilla and mandible. So your maxilla and mandible are the only places that we have these. And so what we have is the tooth, and it's got this periodontal ligament. What else do we want to say about it? Anything?
Wait, so
What is it by?
your jaw's connected?
No. That's a synovial joint.
Okay, but
It's these pegs in these. Yeah, it's only, yes, we only find gomphoses in the mandible and the maxilla because it's the only place we're plugging in teeth. What else do we have to say about it?
held in place by the periodontal ligament.
And what type is it by functional class? Yeah, it's a synarthrosis. So it's not really supposed to move. So those are our fibrous joints. So we can classify our joints based on 3 different types of structures and 3 different types of functions. And you have to be able to figure out how our function overlaps. So for fibrous joints, we have sutures that hold our facial and skull bones together with tiny little fibrous, little bands of fibers that get overtaken by bone. Syndesmosis, we have little collagen fibers banding of different lengths between our bones. And in a gomphosis, we have the periodontal ligament that holds our teeth into the mandible or the maxilla. Those are our fibrous joints. Cartilaginous joints. We have 2 types of cartilaginous joints. So in fibrous joints, we had little fibrous connective tissue found between our bones. In cartilaginous joints, we have cartilage found between our bones. So we have 2 types, synchondroses and symphysis. Who had the synchondroses? Okay, what's a synchondrosis?
Cartilage that it doesn't move, so it's synarthrosis.
It's a synarthrosis,
And
What kind?
where you find it is like your epithelial plate.
Epiphyseal plate is a temporary. Yeah, what kind of cartilage is it? Hyaline cartilage. So that's the key for a synchondrosis is that we have hyaline cartilage. And we had an example, you said the epiphyseal plate. Is that always a synchondrosis?
I would say no.
No, why? Because it gets ossified. It becomes bone. So the synchondrosis is kind of a weird joint. There aren't very many examples in the body. The epiphyseal plate is a temporary synchondrosis, but as you grow and ossify that tissue, it gets overtaken. So that they say that this is just a temporary hyaline cartilage joint, and it's kind of weird because it's between bones, but it's the same pieces of the bone when we're looking at that joint. So really, the only other example is what we find here between the first rib and the manubrium of the sternum. So that was something I kind of forgot to mention yesterday. So let's talk about ribs a little bit. We have, how many ribs? How many sets of ribs? 12. And our true ribs are all of the ribs that are directly attached to the sternum by their own costal cartilage. And then we have false ribs, that their costal cartilage is attached to a costal cartilage that is then attached to the sternum. And then we've got floating ribs. They're false ribs that don't have any costal cartilages at all. So our last two ribs are floating ribs. If you look at these joints, the only example other than your temporary synchondrosis is the epiphyseal plate. The only example that we use of a synchondrosis is right here, where our first rib meets the manubrium of the sternum. That is just all hyaline cartilage. There's no joint cavity or anything in it. So true rib 1, the manubrium of the sternum, is a synchondrosis. Every other joint between the costal cartilage and the sternum is a synovial joint, which is weird. And that's the weird thing about synovial joints. We call them freely movable, but they have varying ranges of motion, even in that. But if you think about it, when I do chest compressions, there's actually movement between those lower ribs and my sternum. There can be. There's not really up here. So just be aware of that. This right here is a synchondrosis. This is a synovial joint. So, okay, so that's our first type of cartilaginous joint. Synchondroses are joined by hyaline cartilage. Okay? Symphysis, who had symphysis? All right.
So symphysis is mostly made of fibrocartilage, but it has some hyaline cartilage in it where your bones articulate, or articulate cartilages in your bones. And what they do is they mostly act as shock absorbers for your spine and your cubic symphysis.
Yeah. So how about functional classification?
We said it was
Antiarthritic, they are. So symphyses are antiarthroses. They're slightly movable, and what we could say, it's a cartilaginous joint, but what's different about this joint is it's a pad of fibrocartilage that we find between the bones. And that pad of fibrocartilage is going to reduce compression between the joints, or between the bones and the joint. So if you think about where we find it, as our intervertebral discs, that definitely helps with shock, with some compressive shock absorption and resistance. We find it in the meniscus of the knee, but the knee's a synovial joint. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we find it just as a symphysis here in the pubic symphysis. So those are two types of cartilaginous joints. They're amphiarthritic. Each individual symphysis on its own doesn't allow for a whole lot of movement. If we move like our entire vertebral column, we can get a lot of movement, but each individual joint is not allowing a lot. Okay.